So you test it out with an at-risk mindset. Let's talk about the commonalities in that. You feel it before you even say it out loud. Something most often feels a little off. Not because everything's falling apart, but because nothing feels fully stable either. You think more than you act. You probably second guess decisions that should feel simple. And underneath, most of your days, there's this quiet tension running in the background, like you're constantly trying to prevent something from going wrong. And over time, that creates a powerful internal pattern. You stop feeling grounded in your life, and you start feeling maybe you're managing risk instead of leading yourself into your future. Now listen to me now, okay? This is not a weakness, and it's not bad luck. This is a conditioned behavioral pattern. And when I first began studying this stuff 22 years ago, I went deep into behavioral science, ancient wisdoms, and performance psychology. And what became clear is this: people operating with an at-risk mindset do not lack ability or capability. They lack internal safety and stability. So the mind begins over-scanning for problems, over-analyzing decisions, and emotionally preparing for what might go wrong, which slowly trains the nervous system to protect instead of create. And eventually that protection pattern becomes automatic. But here's what most people miss. Ready? The pattern is learned. It's not permanent. And science actually backs this. In the 25-year NASA study, Dr. George Land discovered something extraordinary. When testing adults, he rarely found the creative geniuses that NASA was looking for. So he began testing younger and younger age groups. Now here's the shocker. 98% of 5-year-olds tested at the level of creative genius. But when the same people were tested 25 years later, only 2% tested at the genius level. Not because capability disappeared, but because conditioning trained it down through institutions. And renowned behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner, who invented behavioral psychology, is rightfully considered at least the equal of Freud and Jung. He confirmed the same thing that Land discovered, that behavior is shaped by environment, repetition, and reinforcement. Sounds like school, right? So that confidence, that certainty, that creativity, that genius, it didn't disappear. It's still in you. Both concluded the same thing. The genius, it wasn't lost. And frankly, neither is yours. It was conditioned down in school. In school, we were what? Trained to follow instead of learning how to think. Trained to comply instead of developing our individuality and gifts. And worst of all, trained to compete instead of collaborate and create. Now, over time, we move further and further away from how we naturally think, create, and operate. But here's the empowering part. You didn't stop creating your life. This is key. You've been creating it all along. You already have within you an internal automated manifesting mechanism that turns your thoughts into results. Your thoughts shape your habits, and your habits obviously shape your results. So this isn't about learning how to create. It's about learning how to create intentionally. Now, for the person operating at the at-risk mindset like you, that changes everything. Why? Well, it's simple. Because your problem is not a lack of intelligence. It's a nervous system trained to anticipate threat. You over-prepare, you overthink, you overprotect. And slowly, your life becomes organized around what? Avoiding mistakes, instead of creating possibilities. And that's exactly why that threat loop has to be broken. Because the subconscious mind ultimately reinforces whatever pattern is repeated most often, even when the pattern is fear of protection, hesitation, and emotional guarding. Okay? And until that threat loop, at-risk mindset people have is interrupted, you're going to continue confusing protection with safety.
You know, I came in looking for clarity, and I ended up improving my marriage, my confidence, and how I lead my life.
Now here's where it gets fascinating. Across ancient wisdom traditions going back 5,000 years, there's a recurring symbolic idea that appears across all cultures, the jinn, okay? One of the first recorded descriptions of a wish-granting force, sort of a trickster god, if you will. Over time, that same symbolic pattern evolved into, you can see how it went to the genie in the bottle, and eventually the story of Aladdin and the magic lamp. Now stay with me here, because this is never about magic, and it isn't some woo-woo stuff or fairy tales that were written for children. The reason the story has survived for thousands of years across every civilization is because it was always a metaphor for the remarkable subconscious mind, that creative genius that Land discovered that we all have. A force beneath the conscious thought that responds to what? Repeated instruction. And the ancients understood something modern psychology now confirms, and of course is trying to take credit for. The subconscious mind ultimately reinforces whatever pattern is repeated the most, even when the pattern is self-sabotage or fear. And until that pattern is interrupted, people continue repeating emotional cycles, behavioral loops, identity patterns like yours, without realizing they're being conditioned by repetition by themselves. And that's exactly why the ancients didn't just leave stories. They left the instructions. Abracadabra. That's the instruction. It was never about magic. When I say abracadabra, what pops into your head? Magic, a magic trick, a word a magician uses, maybe the great Steve Miller song. Really think about what pops into your head. See, abracadabra is really two words. Abra, I create. Cadabra, as I speak. Meaning your internal dialogue is constantly programming your subconscious direction. And that subconscious direction shapes your behavior, it shapes your habits, it shapes your emotional responses, and ultimately your results. Now, inside the best-selling book Standing Tall, now published in 3 languages, kind of surprised me, you'll discover the 7 ancient verities. Verity actually means truth. These were handed down for thousands of years. Truth doesn't change. And when you align with truth, stability replaces fear. The ancient verities, they're not motivational ideas. They are conditioning interrupters. Patterns of thought and action designed to interrupt the threat loop that you run through all the time, replace destructive conditioning, and retrain the subconscious toward internal stability and confident execution. Because repetition created the old pattern, and repetition is what rewires it. And the person operating from the at-risk mindset, that rewiring becomes life-changing. Why? Because this pattern is not a weakness. It is over-conditioned protection, constant vigilance, emotional guarding. And that's why Verity 1 becomes so powerful. Verity 1 is gratitude. Not as an emotion, as a cause. Because one of the greatest truths you'll ever discover is that gratitude is not an effect of life going well, it's actually a cause. See, a grateful heart begins changing perception, changing focus, and changing what the subconscious mind reinforces. And as gratitude deepens, more things to be grateful for begin appearing in your life, which slowly interrupts that threat loop you're stuck in and replaces fear with grounded certainty. And then we're on to Verity 6 is powerful for that type, first class. You were made first class by first class because you were not designed by your creator for a fear-based life. You were created by the best for the best. And good news, people with an at-risk mindset often carry something extraordinary. Deep empathy, sensitivity, the ability to understand and care for others deeply. But when fear of risk takes over, those gifts become guarded instead of expressed. And first-class living begins changing that. Because becoming first class, it's not about superiority, it's about rendering first-class service, leading with value, which you have, leading with integrity, leading with compassion instead of fear. And when that internal standard changes, your thinking stabilizes, your emotions stabilize, and most importantly, your execution stabilizes.
I always felt like I was one step away from everything falling apart, and this helped me feel calm and back in control again and clear about everything.
Now, here's what makes this real transformation instead of just information. Once you get started with us, you'll complete a short assessment that allows us to generate your full color code profile. And through that profile, you discover your core motive. Not just how you behave, but why you behave that way. Because most personality systems, and they're all pretty good, but they measure behavior. Color code goes much deeper. It measures your core motive, the internal driver behind your decisions, your emotional patterns, your stress responses, and most importantly, your relationships, and the way you experience safety and connection. Now, most people spend years trying to manage fear without ever understanding what's actually driving it. And once we understand your motive, everything becomes more stable and precise. And this is where most programs really fall short. They give you information, but no personalization. That's why when you enroll, you also receive a private one-on-one strategy session with me, so we can review your results together, go through your full 27-page color code breakdown, identify your strengths, spot your blind spots, emotional patterns, and build a customized stabilization and execution plan based on your at-risk mindset, your goals, your lifestyle, your relationships, and your emotional triggers, and most importantly, the season of life that you're currently in. Because transformation happens faster when the strategy is built specifically for you, okay? Not generic advice. A personalized roadmap, if you will. For over 15 years, we've been doing this very successfully, and we've helped more than 4,000 people break their patterns. This is not theory for us. It's tested, refined, perfected, and proven. Now, inside the Standing Tall members area, you receive an instant download of the best-selling book, Standing Tall, your 7 Ancient Verities workbook to reinforce what you're learning, your color code profile. You also get your behavioral pattern breakdown and your stabilization and execution framework. Once you fill out a short survey so that I can understand your hopes and goals, you'll have access to my calendar for your one-on-one appointment and structured guidance to move from emotional instability about risk into grounded confidence and aligned execution. Plus, you're supported through 2 live Zoom mastermind sessions every week. You're not going to be doing this alone. Because as Napoleon Hill from Think and Grow Rich said, no one achieves, let me quote him here, lasting success without a mastermind alliance. So twice a month, we come together at a live Zoom to keep you grounded, to keep you accountable, and to keep you moving forward with clarity and confidence. Because accountability is what stabilizes behavior. Now let's be clear. This is not motivation. This is internal stabilization, okay? If you're ready to stop living in constant emotional protection, okay, click below, go through Standing Tall, get your color code profile, and begin building a life that feels grounded, safe, stable, and fully aligned with who you really are. You do not overcome fear with control. You overcome fear by becoming internally aligned with who you really are. And once that happens, you stop managing life from protection and start leading with confidence. So hit the link, and I'll see you on the inside. Peace be the journey.